Leslie Korn, Director of Research at the Center for World Indigenous Studies, a nonprofit 501c3 organization founded in 1979 by Chief George Manuel and Rudolph Rÿser at the request of tribal governments in the Pacific Northwest United States. I'm delighted that you can be with us today to listen to two of our most dynamic speakers who are activist scholars working with the center and who've been deeply influenced in their own right by the work of Rudolph Rÿser. Indigenous nations worldwide fight for the right to control their lands, lives, natural resources, and their destinies. In the United States, many indigenous nations have fought for and won tribal recognition and legal sovereignty. On the international stage, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples have propelled Indigenous peoples' concern into the mainstream, yet often without a mechanism to enforce these rights. On both the national and international stage, much remains to be achieved. While many have worked toward Indigenous self-determination, few have committed their lives so thoroughly toward this mission as Dr. Rudolph Rÿser, the founding chair of CWIS, an activist scholar think tank that works internationally, advising and supporting Indigenous nations' rights and resources. Dr. Rÿser has worked in Indian affairs since the early 1960s. He played a pivotal role in envisioning and then securing self-government in the United States and has written many seminal documents articulating international Indigenous rights. Dr. Rÿser, also known as Rudy, has influenced students, scholars, and leaders. Considering his work, we thought it valuable to invite two activist scholars to converse about their experiences with Dr. Rudolph Rÿser and his influence on his work and his ongoing influence on the field of Fourth World Studies and the fight for Indigenous sovereignty and self-determination around the world. Today, join me in welcoming activist and author Dina Gilio-Whitaker, the author of As Long as Grass Grows, and Dr. Erich Steiman, professor of sociology and scholar of American settler colonialism at Pitzer College in California. Welcome, Dina. Welcome, Erich. Wonderful to see you again. Let's start with your initial impression of Rudy.
My initial impression of Rudy was that he had a take on things, especially around international Indigenous perspectives, that I hadn't seen anywhere. And there was no other perspective like it. The way that he was thinking about Indigenous nations and their relationships with states, the concept of Fourth World theory, I thought was absolutely brilliant, and it was something that made absolute sense to me. It answered questions that nobody else was even approaching. That was the beginning of knowing that I was working with someone that had an incredible mind and somebody that I wanted to learn from. And so I learned to see Rudy as a mentor, and to this day I still think of him as someone that mentored me for the 6 years that I actually worked with and for him.
I met Rudy when I was researching efforts by Washington tribes to get recognition of their status as nations from the state of Washington. They did this over 15 years. I was searching in archives in the state capitol and finding all these documents, and a couple names kept coming up. Joe de la Cruz and Rudolph Rÿser was often associated with Joe de la Cruz, as well as authored other documents that related to this. And so I looked him up, and turns out he created this thing called the Center for World Indigenous Studies that was right there in Olympia. And he very generously agreed to do an interview. So I drove from Seattle and the University of Washington up to Olympia and went to the Center for World Indigenous Studies, and did my first of 2 interviews with Rudy that were so clarifying to me. It helped, really just clear up the immense confusion that was in all kinds of scholarship, legal scholarship, political science scholarship, sociological scholarship, because everything was just muddled, because American Indian nations were not really categorized as nations. In the scholarship, they were treated as groups of ethnic minorities. And so all the treatment and discussion of the issues relating to them theoretically or practically, it kind of didn't square. It didn't square with the history. It kind of naturalized the elimination of indigenous nationhood. So what Rudolph provided was like a just clarity that nationhood and the sovereignty that kind of, is part of that, is, as the elders and many leaders have fought for decades and generations, was clear and strong, and that what needed to change was that non-indigenous officials needed to kind of figure that out and incorporate that into how they did what they did. So that was really a huge moment for my own scholarship.
I would say that fourth world theory has not left the way that I think of indigenous and native nationhood, because that's really the piece of it, I think, that he, as you said, really clarified. He was talking sovereignty, and he was talking, but sovereignty is only part of that conversation about nationhood. And when we say that term sovereignty, it means different things to different people, right? Because of the legal structure and, in the US system, and sovereignty, in the US legal system means quasi-sovereignty. It means not real sovereignty. It means, something less than self-determination, or they use that term self-determination, but it's a very particular type of self-determination that's defined by domestic law. And so I think that's a huge piece of what the work does. And because of his work in the international arena, because Rudy and the Center for World Indigenous Studies has been involved in the drafting of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, or what we call UNDRIP. He was there from the beginning of all of it. He was there in some of those really formative years, and of course he was on the American Indian Policy Review Commission in the late 70s. So he's been in what we call the Indian business, or like what they sometimes call the Indian business, for a long time, and formulating this whole idea of sovereignty, for better or for worse, for for all of its clarities and all of its murkiness. I'm teaching right now a class called Decolonization and Practice. So in this course, it's an upper division course, 400 level course. So these are mostly seniors. And most of them are students who, they're not American Indian, they're not even American Indian Studies majors, but, and most of them have never even taken an American Indian Studies course, but they get it. Like, it blows me away. It's the first time I've taught this course, and I developed it, I stewarded it through the curriculum process, and not really knowing, like, how's it gonna land, how students are gonna respond to it, but I'm just pretty amazed that they have such a sophisticated level of getting things. And so I've taught sections of Rudy's book in that class, and it's been, completely instrumental and irreplaceable. I mean, there's no other source that I can go to that will articulate with such clarity the way he does about the positionality of American Indian tribes in this international system. And not only that positionality, like sort of like the existing role and kind of reality, but what's possible. And that's what I find so valuable about fourth world theory, this fourth world perspective, is that he sees a clear path to what Indigenous nationhood can be in the international system. Even scholars who have been thinking this through for a long time, there's a stopping point where they can understand the doctrine of discovery, they understand this domination framework, but there's less vision about how we can move forward, what Indigenous nationhood means in the international arena. And that's the impact that his thinking has had on mine. I think as I'm in my own writing and my own thinking and teaching in a way so it's like breadcrumb, like he's left this series of breadcrumbs that I can follow and kind of think along the same lines and imagine what a future of Indigenous nationhood relatives to states could look like potentially. That's more functional than what we have now, which is basically within this, this domination framework.
So there's two things I want to highlight about Rudolph's thinking that like totally is just outstanding and shaped how I see everything to this day. And one is, in the field of sociology, that was all construed as a kind of racial and ethnic thing. And that means it's kind of compared to the Black Civil Rights Movement. And then the assumption is it's about equality and inclusion. And so when his ideas help clarify, it's about nationhood, it's about nation building, it's about acknowledging Indigenous nationhood, and it's about decolonization. So that is just like a pivotal switch, in my thinking, and then in many other people thinking. I know, like it's not about equality and inclusion, but like decolonization and kind of nationhood, right? So that's fundamental, foundational, that, is a guiding, light for me to this day, right? And then the second piece is, when I interviewed him, he drew on the experience of kind of tribal councils in taking action in the 70s, that it was not clear what they could do. But they had a vision for what they wanted to do, and they started doing things. So there's a strategic innovation element of, there's a lot of confusion. No one knows exactly how this all goes together, and we're going to try to keep building the world we want to create, rather than waiting for the US Congress to tell us we can do this or that, or even waiting for the courts to tell us we can do this or that. So there's like an understanding that there's a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty in political, legal, cultural systems. And if you have a vision for what you want and you have some resources, you can try to kind of construct that and keep being adaptive and innovative as you go. You were talking about sovereignty. I remember really clearly Rudolph saying, sovereignty is sovereignty. It's a useful concept. It's useful in our struggle now, but it's not the end game either, right? There's limitations of the concept. It's kind of a European notion and involves more domination over, but like, it's useful. We're advancing our effort to be more self-determining in an expansive sense, right? Through it and through various things we can do. And I just thought that was just so interesting and suggestive and still inspiring in thinking about what's going on here and what's possible, and you don't have to wait for the people, quote, in charge to tell you what you can do.
That's also a huge piece of what I learned in the years that I was working with him. And we worked with tribal governments. That's when I really started to understand what Rudy was saying too, about what you just said, about not asking permission, about just asserting, the assertion of sovereignty, not the asking of permission about what we can do, from your colonial overlord. So that was pretty revolutionary for me to understand that. Like, yeah, sovereignty is something that you exercise. It's not something that you ask for permission for.
Let's also consider the critique of Dr. Rÿser's work. Some people have called him a dreamer, others unrealistic, still others an anarchist, precisely because he asserts that indigenous nations and states are political equals. What you both point out is that we can define very clearly what the problem is, but it's not as easy to determine what is the answer. One of his significant contributions is defining a framework for negotiations and a strategy for implementation and oversight that leads to accountability, which remains a missing part of indigenous nation governance. Erich, you point back to the 70s and 80s when he began developing these ideas, yet it is only now that some of his recommendations are being considered. One of the biggest challenges we face is implementation and accountability. How do indigenous nations assert and claim their rights and resources? And who holds corporations and governments accountable when it is the corporations and governments who are doing the taking?
Some of my early learnings about Rudy's work and thinking involved the context of intense conflict at the local, county, and state level between tribes and tribal rights and non-Indigenous government officials, DNR departments, and those were really intense, bitter fights, right? These are like in the context of the Bolt decision in Washington State, there's legal rights kind of acknowledged that tribes had, and intense conflicts and resistance from not only like white fishermen, but also like the white guys working in the Washington Department of Natural Resources and Department of Fisheries. That it seemed unimaginable that states and like tribal governments with robust tribal, departments and exercising environmental control over their lands could coexist in any way, shape, or form that was all that. But they did that. I mean, they envisioned that, they advocated for it, they communicated, they educated an amazing number of people. And eventually that resistance kind of became transferred into agreements where they said, well, we'll figure out how we'll work together. That seemed pretty unrealistic when they started doing that. Because I've read all the documents and I've heard a lot of speeches, and that looked like no way is that ever going to happen. And now it's like, it's the way you do business. Yep. It's the way tribes and states interact. It's like not controversial. It's fully kind of mutually recognized. There's conflicts. And,
Well, we have this language now of co-management of resources, and that's like a growing conversation. I was just reading something this morning that's really interesting, that the state of California in February introduced a bill in the state legislature to bring traditional ecological knowledge into the state's natural resource management practices, and they use the term co-management. So we're seeing that it's normalized now. And you look at the National Park System. The National Park System did a report that came out a couple of years ago, pretty recently, outlining and detailing the work that they've done with tribes over the last couple of decades or so. The collaborative work with tribal governments, including these co-management agreements. So your point is, you're right on point about that.
And even on the specifically like the environmental stuff, they took it to the Reagan administration in the early 80s. They took it to the EPA, and they got the EPA, the first federal agency, to acknowledge tribal nationhood and sovereignty and to start to work with them as kind of peer governments. Now it's, again, normalized, but that's what Rudolph and the tribal leaders he was working with in this effort, they spearheaded that. So all the stuff that's now like commonplace, that comes directly out of that legacy at a very big level, specific and also abstract. So
yeah, and I think that it will continue too, like if going back to the UNDRIP, right, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, Rudy worked on that with a core group of people for over 20 years. That was in the making, and there were a lot of compromises. I know there was states. It took all that time for states to agree to some of the ideas that these Indigenous people were fighting for, and what they got was a really watered down agreement. But what we have, even though it's just a declaration and not a covenant or a treaty, we have this language of, personally, I think the most important piece of that is free, prior, and informed consent. Right? And that idea of consent, that what happens on Indigenous territories must, especially around development, must be met with consent, not just consultation. And I think that we're seeing that in that document, that bill that I just referenced, that's before the state legislator. It actually includes the language of free, prior, and informed consent in that. And he makes the point, all those years ago, about how tribes, need to start behaving like nations. And that is, part of the seed that gets planted that has now bloomed into this whole kind of garden of ideas that have manifested themselves in federal policy. I think the long-term influence of and contribution for Rudy's work will be especially at the international scale, where this foundation's already been laid, and we see it remains to be seen how that can actually bloom into any kind of healthy relationship. I don't know. I don't have that long-term vision, but right now it's still really characterized by conflict and by the domination of states over nations. Rudy's contribution is not just the political stuff, but the way that the work, Rudy's work and also Leslie's work around food traditions and culture. They've been deeply involved in that, and traditional knowledge. I mean, they were advancing traditional knowledge decades before anybody was using the term traditional knowledge or ecological knowledge. Reality of traditional ecological knowledge is finally now becoming recognized for the ways that it can shape the environmental crisis, the climate crisis that we're living with now. There's finally this growing recognition that, Indigenous people really did have the knowledge, they understood deep connection to land and to environment and to ecosystems, and maybe we need to start looking to those knowledge systems for answers to sustainability. And so that's something that is that I think is going to continue to grow. I think it's going to be difficult because there are issues around cultural appropriation. The root of Indigenous knowledge is really about reciprocity, and so there's got to be equity in those relationships. But I think this is what I'm seeing in my own work, and I do think that that's going to continue to reverberate into the future. And we can trace much of that back to the work of CWIS and Rudy and his work around traditional knowledge and his work growing up in a tribal community, and how that influenced him as a person.
It's a challenging thing for me to see because I'm aware of, I know a bit about a lot of work Rudy has done, but he's done even more than I know, right? And I think that's some of the challenge of people really taking in the breadth and diversity of his work. You have to know a lot of stuff to be able to see all the range of the work and know that the things that are on the plate now, he was helping craft 20, 30, maybe 40 years ago. So you need to actually have a long view and a wide view to kind of capture the kind of depth and scope of his kind of theorizing and contributions and engagements. And so I think it will probably be just accumulating more appreciation for more of this as the various threads of fourth world nationhood, kind of international indigenous relations, evolving kind of decolonizing relations with states and indigenous nations, the incorporation of traditional indigenous environmental knowledge. As those, a lot of those happened in different communities, in different places, or different dialogues, as maybe those are all kind of more understood by more people outside of their particular spheres. The people who've been seeing those, and advancing and tying them together for a long time will, I think, be more visible to more people. And that's just what I'm thinking. I mean, it'd be really amazing to do a reading list on like indigenous social theory, and his work would be front and center in there. So that's what I think.
It's hard to say like what the future is going to look like because of Rudy's work, but we know what the present is like for sure.
Thank you both for meeting to discuss Dr. Rÿser's work and your own work in the quest for self-determination for Indigenous peoples worldwide. At CWIS, we are in the process of creating a documentary series about the work of Dr. Rudolph Rÿser and other leaders in the field of self-determination of Indigenous peoples over the last 60 years. While researching for the film, we were astonished by the originality of Dr. Rÿser's ideas and the bravery in battle demonstrated by his generation in changing the power dynamics between Indigenous peoples and states' governments. We're excited about documenting this story and ensuring that everyone has access to this history, its lessons, as it most surely should not be forgotten. If you are inspired to act, visit our website, watch short clips from the film, and let us know about your own activist scholarship. We always enjoy hearing from you and benefit from that as well. Thank you for joining us. I'm Leslie Korn.